Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Gillian Dagan. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer at ABC Research, and I'm joined today with Annie Hughes, who is our business developer specializing in import and export. So today we're going to be doing a webinar. I got detained by the FDA, and now what? And hopefully we're going to cover the ins and outs of FDA detention, and Annie's going to talk you through how to hopefully avoid FDA detention, but if it happens to you, the best ways to fix the problems at hand.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Annie Hughes, Business Development Director for International Trade, Produce, and Seafood here at ABC Research Labs. As Gillian also introduced herself, we're here to go through FDA detentions with you all. We'll start here. So just one little plug here for us. We do have an awesome blog that we wanted to invite you all to subscribe to. You can go to our website at foodtestingexperts.com. We'll be posting interesting articles, guides, different information, videos that are entertaining and also informative, and also PowerPoint presentations, little how-tos that can go straight to your inbox if you want to subscribe. Just click on the blog and you'll see a subscribe to us box there. You can put your email address in. This will also be available on that blog if you need to watch it again or have any other questions. Okay, so just a general overview of what we'll be talking about today. We're doing an introduction to ABC Research and our entire FDA detention resolution team and process. We'll go over important documents that you'll need to gather if your product does in fact get detained, and that would be for our lab or if you choose to use another lab. We'll also go over the red and the green lists, and more importantly, how to be removed from the red list if you happen to be on it. And then, as Gil just mentioned, we will have a live question and answer session at the end of this webinar. As she had said, there is a chat window where you can type in your questions at any time during this session. We'll be happy to answer them all.
All right, so just to get started, let's talk a little bit about who ABC Research is. We are a third-party, independent, privately owned testing lab for food, feed, and botanicals, and we're located in Gainesville, Florida. We've been around since 1967. I myself have been with the company since '03, so I laugh and say that I'm on the inventory. But I've seen this company grow and undergo so many changes, even over the last 10 years. We are a full service lab, which means we test food, feed, and botanicals for microbiological and chemical agents. So we can do anything from like E. coli or salmonella, all the way to pesticide residue or antibiotic residue testing. We also do nutritional analysis, and we even do interesting stuff like taste panels. We are an ISO 17025 accredited lab. That means that we undergo an accreditation process which involves a bunch of record keeping, proficiency testing, and auditing. And that just shows you that we are putting out precise and accurate data, and that we undergo a check program for that. We also have the widest breadth of offerings of any food testing laboratory in the U.S. We just have the biggest variety of tests that we do. In our 40-something year history, we've pretty much seen it all, and we work with all different types of food, feed, alcoholic beverages, and botanicals.
Okay, so just an overview of the FDA import detention resolution testing and services that we offer. We do have an exclusive team dedicated to the FDA detention process at ABC. So what that means is there's a whole group of us that solely work on your FDA detentions. Our first goal, as well as yours, is obviously to get your product to market and to do it as quickly as possible. If you are on the detention without physical examination lists, based on the import alert, obviously you would be detained. There's also a red list. If you are on that, it increases your costs, it delays your product getting out to market, and our ultimate goal, as well as yours, is to get on the green list, which is one where you will not be detained by FDA anymore. So we help you do that. Even though ABC Research Labs is centrally located in Gainesville, Florida, we do have a dedicated sampling group throughout the United States. So we can sample anywhere across the United States, including Puerto Rico, whether it's your warehouse or at ports, we have samplers everywhere. We're very familiar with all of the FDA offices and compliance officers. We have close relationships with them and have worked with all of them. Our packets have all been accepted by the FDA and the compliance officers, and we have not had one refused to date based on our packet. We do help you with tips and guidelines on how to be put off that red list or the detention without physical examination list. We do work closely with FDA attorneys and customs brokers nationwide, so we do have good relationships with them as well. So as I mentioned, we do have a dedicated team at ABC. This is great in the event one of us is not working for that day or out on something else. We have a group of people, including the scientists, myself, our logistics team, operations. They're all copied in on this email address, which is fda@abcr.com. If you send your documents, questions, anything at all to that email address, somebody will get back to you quickly. It might be a scientist that answers your question directly. It could be me, but it ensures that your questions are our priority. So one question that clients typically have is, why do certain manufacturers get detained, or why is it that you seem to always be getting detained? FDA, if they have evidence that the commodity, it can be the manufacturer, the shipper, or even just the entire country, if they feel that there's any violation of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act or a potential for unsafe food to be entering the United States, they can put you on an import alert. It could be that your product is manufactured, processed, or packed under unsanitary conditions. It could be your product is adulterated or misbranded, meaning they believe it has pesticides, filth, antibiotic residue, something to that effect. It can also be that maybe just something as simple as record keeping requirements have not been compliant within that manufacturer or the country or the shipper. That will put you on an import alert, which can also be known as a red list. But that allows them to detain your product without actually physically examining it, meaning when it comes into this country, you will be put on automatic detention. I've included a website there, which is great. If you all are not familiar with it, you can click on that, and it lists the import alerts by number. So you can actually click on it and see whether it's a commodity or a country that your product could be detained under. If you have shrimp, you can search and see all of the import alerts related to shrimp. So you have a better understanding of why your product could be detained or what manufacturers are on that list.
Okay, and actually, while Annie checks out what questions we have, because we've had a couple of questions pop up, I just wanted to say, we've mentioned that, us as a company, ABC has worked with a number of different regional FDA offices. So depending on obviously where your product is detained, the analytical work and that report needs to go to different FDA offices. Relating to the detention process, these import alerts that Annie mentioned are out there, and they are enforced at the discretion of the FDA. And that's where it gets a little confusing. So although there may be an import alert that applies to your product or applies to the country that you're importing a specific product from, sometimes it may be enforced, sometimes it may not. And that it sounds strange, but that's really kind of at the whim of the compliance officers at that specific port. In the past, people have tried to port shop and figure out which ports, is it going to be Los Angeles versus Savannah versus Miami? Which port is going to detain for certain import alerts that my products are going to fall under. You really can't do that nowadays. Because of the way the FDA is organized now, they will know if you've tried to import to a different port prior. But don't be surprised if you see some import alerts enforced sometimes and others seem like they're falling by the wayside. There is definitely an air of subjectivism when it comes to what the FDA will detain. And somebody else asked, how do we know if we are on a red or a green list? That's a great question. And we're going to address that in just a second. And then there's also a question on how will FSMA lab accreditation rules affect labs and importers. I'll go ahead and answer that one. It's kind of a broad question. So how will the Food Safety Modernization Act lab accreditation rules affect labs and importers? So if you're not familiar, Food Safety Modernization Act was legislation that was signed into effect in 2010 with about a 5-year implementation period for all the regulations to come out. So it got signed into law, and the FDA has been working to write all the regulations that will enforce the spirit of the Food Safety Modernization Act. FSMA, as it's called, actually does have a big effect on importing products and labs like ours that do work for importers on detained products. These regulations have not been fully executed yet, but the spirit of what the FDA wants to put out there is that labs should be accredited. We talked about our ISO 17025 accreditation. That is the highest accreditation a laboratory can attain. So no matter what FDA puts out there as far as regulations on accredited labs, we know that we're going to be good and we're going to be compliant with the regulations. There are some labs out there that are not ISO 17025, so that's definitely a really good question to ask when you're evaluating what lab to use. You want your lab to be an ISO 17025 accredited lab, and they should be able to show you something to that effect, a certificate from ISO. In addition, how will FSMA affect importers? There are parts of the Food Safety Modernization Act, like the VQIP program, which is Voluntary Qualified Importer Program. That again, I mean, it says voluntary. It's not something you have to participate in, but FDA is going to have some type of system where, you can show FDA as an importer that you have all your ducks in a row. It doesn't mean that your product's not going to get detained, but it's a best practice to notify the FDA that you understand that you're buying from a quality foreign firm. You're importing the right way. You have all of your paperwork in order. So there are going to be some voluntary hoops to jump through that will give you better odds against getting your product detained. The other major aspect of Food Safety Modernization Act when talking about importing products is that any product that's imported, the FDA is going to want to see a food safety plan from that foreign firm. So in the US, we have HACCP plans, which is Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point. Those plans are what domestic firms have to show that they've acknowledged that they understand the food safety hazards that could happen in their manufacturing facilities, and that they're doing everything that they can to prevent those food safety issues from occurring. We want to see the same thing in a foreign firm. We want to see that a foreign firm that we're going to import from has put the time and the commitment into food safety and is being held at the same standard as a U.S. producer. So that's probably one of the biggest tenets under FSMA for importers. Okay, so one other question before we continue. What is the main reason to detain a product that is not in an alert? Again, FDA can decide to detain product just on suspicion. So the import alerts provide a nice published listing of commodities or countries that that FDA has said, yes, we do consider a higher food safety risk. If something happens, let's say when we had the melamine in pet food scare a couple of years ago, you better believe that before an import alert could be drafted and published, FDA has the power to go ahead and say, you know what? I want to check everything that has protein in it coming out of the country of China. If they have concern for whatever reason or suspicion, they can definitely decide to detain a product that's not in an alert. In addition, if they stop a product and they themselves, the FDA actually samples your product and they find, let's say a drug residue, or they find salmonella, or they find something they consider to be an adulterant, your product is definitely getting detained, whether there's an import alert or not. So it could be from suspicion, it could be from the FDA actually taking a sample. But when we talk about detained without physical examination, DWPE, that's when we're really talking about the import alerts. Okay, let's get a little bit further and then we'll go back to the questions.
Okay, so going on to the red list and the green list, import alerts will most likely, when you click on that previous link for the import alerts, They'll give you a brief description as to why the product is detained, what they're suspicious of, and what kind of testing they're going to want the product to undergo before it can be released. At the bottom of that, as you scroll down, you'll see what they call their red list. Sometimes you'll see a green list. Sometimes you only see a red list or you only see a green list. So that's where you can sort through if your manufacturer, your country, your shipper happens to be on the list. So the red list is going to be a list of specific commodities and manufacturers who will automatically be detained when their product enters the United States. That's the list you ultimately want to get off of. The green list are those who have been removed from the red list and won't be detained. So these companies or manufacturers have met the criteria for exclusion from this red list. So those are the ones that will not be detained. Believe there was a question on where you find it. So again, that's going to be from that previous link. You'll see, if you scroll from the top of that website or web page down, you'll see a red list or a green list.
Somebody did ask a question about, is there anything that a foreign firm can do to expedite being imported into, or having product imported into the U.S. if they've never imported or they've never had somebody import from their firm before. So as long as you're not working with a commodity that has been flagged for that country of origin, and you're not already on an import alert, really all you can do is have a food safety program kind of in order. If you're a reputable processor, you would have that anyway. And then the first time you import, you may or you may not get detained. It's not because you're a new processor or anything like that. So there isn't too much you can do. Now, moving forward with what I mentioned about the voluntary qualified importer program, there will be some aspects of your business that you hopefully can show to the FDA to get through some of those loops, but that's not guaranteed, and that regulation has not been put out yet. That's one of the last things for FDA to write for the Food Safety Modernization Act. I assure you that when it is written, we will probably have a whole other webinar just on VQuip and how to properly participate in that program to maximize efficiency in getting your product into market.
Okay, so once you've been detained, ABC is going to need certain documents to schedule your sampling and your testing of the product. We're going to need your notice of action, and that's going to come from your compliance officer, and your customs broker should be able to provide you with this along with some other information if you don't have it. We'll need your bill of lading, your customs form 3461, your commercial invoice, and your packing list. A lot of these documents we need in order to formulate a quote for you. We need to know where the product is, pack sizes. Notice of action will tell us exactly why your product is detained, which is critical. So we make sure we sample the correct number of samples as required by FDA, as well as perform the analysis that they require. These documents are also requested by the FDA when we submit a final packet to them. So that is one of the primary reasons we do require or request these particular documents. Again, your customs broker can get them for you, or it might be documents you have on hand. So basically the process for FDA, we try to make it really easy for everybody because it's stressful enough when you get detained and you know that product has to get out and it has to get out quickly. So as soon as you've sent us those documents, or at least as many of them as you have, we'll have a quote prepared for you to review, which will go out usually same day. It will include the cost of sampling and testing of the product, which ABC will do. As soon as you've received it and approved the quote, you simply send a release to the warehouse letting them know that ABC will be collecting samples, and we do need access to the entire detained lot. A question I get often is, how many samples will you pool? How much does the warehouse have to actually pool for us? FDA does require us to have access to the entire lot, so we do ask that. Once you've sent the release to the warehouse, we are able to then schedule the sampling. We try to get the sampling scheduled within a day or two of you giving us the approval and that release being sent. Our sampler goes in after they've set the appointment up. They collect the samples that they need. They only pull the amount that are required by FDA, so we don't take any more than we have to. And they go ahead and have them shipped to the lab here in Gainesville via overnight FedEx, so we get it the next day. And your analysis and preparations will begin that day that we receive the samples. Once your testing is completed, and we'll keep you updated along the way, some micro tests require cultural confirmations, and we let you know if that's necessary because it does extend the testing time slightly. But as soon as your testing is complete that same day, we'll email you the results with an importer statement. So they do not go to FDA yet, they go to you. You need to complete and return the importer statement after you've reviewed your results, and we can walk you through that importer statement if you have any questions as you fill it out. That statement gives us permission from you to submit the results to the FDA. So as soon as we receive that importer statement from you, the packet gets submitted that same day to FDA. So we try to really streamline our process so packets are sent out right away so your compliance officer can review it. After the FDA receives it, it's in their hands, so unfortunately we can't tell you how long it will take them to review it, but you will receive notification from your compliance officer of their decision, whether the product's been released or rejected based on your results.
Yeah, and I'd like to point out something that I think is really important to note. A couple of things, and this will touch on one of the questions we've had. You do get the chance to review your results and say whether or not you would like them sent to the FDA. You may be wondering why somebody would choose not to have their results sent to the FDA. Well, if the results come back and we found, let's say it's detained for pesticide residue, we found pesticide residue on your product, and let's say the size of the of what's represented on the commercial invoice is not that large, and it's actually better for you to take the shipment and send it elsewhere rather than having the FDA see that you've gotten a hit for something that they've detained for. I mean, that is up to you. As our client, you own the data, and that's a very important thing when looking and choosing a lab to work with, especially for FDA detention. You really need to make sure that as the paying client, you have ownership over the data and you still control the process. It seems like you're handing us over all of these documents and all this information, and then you kind of just have to sit back and let us do our work. That last thumbs up or thumbs down decision, though, to show the FDA the results or not to show the FDA the results, that truly does reside with you guys, and that's what's really important. I can't say for a fact that every lab functions in that manner, but we believe that's a very important thing to empower our clients and let them know whether or not, let them know that they have the decision-making power to say yes or no, whether we're going to send that packet to the FDA. Secondly, somebody asked a question that relates to this. She says, can you discuss if the FDA will require labs to alert the FDA if a lab finds a health risk in a product that's being tested versus now where the current guidelines do not require the labs to disclose the results without the importer's permission? So I don't believe that this will change under the Food Safety Modernization Act. And then again, the full Food Safety Modernization Act is not written yet, but we are a privately held third-party testing lab. The only person that we give data to is the owner of that data, and that is our paying client. So we are confidential. The only way that even the FDA or the USDA could get us to hand over data is by subpoena. So I think that's one of the very interesting intricacies of our business that sometimes clients aren't privy to, that you really truly do own the data. You're in charge of it. You have the permission to tell us who to share it with and who not to share it with. I don't think that will change, only because we have had the Reportable Foods Registry for a number of years in the U.S., and our findings as a third-party lab, we do not have to report health concerns or health risks on the Reportable Food Registry, because quite frankly, when we're testing your product, it's not yet released into commerce. So there is no health risk. It should be sitting in a bonded warehouse or cold storage facility. So if we found something to be, let's say, salmonella positive, there's nothing to say that you couldn't send that product to a cook facility to get rid of the salmonella and sell it as a wholesome product. So I don't think that that will change. So the results that we get, no matter what they are the property of our clients and do not have to be handed over to anybody in the meantime.
So one question a lot of you will have is how to get off that red list if you happen to be on it. FDA's rules are you have to have at least 5 consecutive clean entries. Once you've got those, you can begin to file a petition to be removed from this red list, which has to include certain documents, including a root cause analysis and a list of corrective actions that have been implemented at the manufacturer level or the shipper level. The reason we say at least 5 consecutive clean entries is that typically you're bringing in several loads at one time. You might have 40 on the water. So if you have 5 clean ones and you submit this documentation, everything that's coming into the border in the meantime will probably still be detained because you're still on that list. And it takes a certain amount of time for the FDA to review your petition to eventually get you off that list. We do highly recommend consulting with import attorneys because they help expedite this process. They know the ins and outs of working with the FDA to try to get you off that red list quickly. And we do work closely with import attorneys. We can submit packets to them, any documentation that they need that we have, results, anything that will help them move your petition to the front of the line to get off that red list.
I just wanted to go back to this slide. That link down at the bottom, that is the import list. If you go ahead, and click on this link, let's see if we can open one up together and look at it. I'm not sure. Oh, here we go. Okay, so here are import alerts by number. And so you can see DWPE, detention without physical examination. That's what we've been talking about. White or brown basmati rice from India. So let's just go ahead and click on this one. And if you click and you scroll down to the end of an import alert, you can see that it talks about the product. It talks about why they're detaining this product. And then if you look right at the middle of your screen, you'll see it says list of firms and their products that have met the criteria for exclusion from this import alert. So AKA the green list. So in theory, if you are importing from any of the folks on this green list, all these foreign firms, they've shown what, let's just call it, for lack of a better term, good behavior with the FDA. Once you get through this entire list, okay, so those are from India. You also see ones from United Arab Emirates and the United Kingdom. This import alert only has a green list. Some import alerts, they will have a green list and they will have a red list. And so that red list means if you're importing from these foreign firms, you're definitely getting detained. Just to give you guys some clarification on that, because somebody had said, you know, what is the red list and what is the green list? So hopefully that clears it up a little bit. And obviously you may import from a foreign firm that's not on either one of those lists, but if that product and the country of origin match the import alert, you do always run the risk of getting detained. You know, I always like to say that that we're like mechanics. When you have an issue, you know, when you have an issue, we're the ones you call. You don't necessarily need to talk to us prior, but as far as getting people off of the red and onto the green list, you know, that's our job. Not only is your mechanic there to fix your car, but your mechanic is there to help you do preventative maintenance so you don't break down on the side of the road. And whether that preventative maintenance is, you know, us helping you get on that green list or talking you through some of your concerns with FDA detention, I think I can safely say that Annie and our doors are always open, and you can always feel free to call us, email us, tweet us even, and we're happy to answer any questions. Okay, so somebody else, there's another question that popped up. Isn't FDA testing by themselves? FDA can pull a sample of your product if they choose, and they do have their own FDA labs that will test the product. Sometimes this happens, sometimes it doesn't. You can be detained and FDA will say, hey, we pulled a sample, we found glyphosate, let's say, on your product. Now we're detaining your entire shipment, and it would be up to you as the importer to contact somebody like ABC, have us pull samples, and show that we're not getting those same results. It's hard to go up against the FDA, but you do have that option. Secondarily, if you're talking about detention without physical examination, that without physical examination part, that means the FDA has not actually pulled a sample of your shipment and tested it. It just means that they, let's say you're bringing in shrimp from China, they're going to be suspect that there are antibiotic residues there because they've seen bad behavior from Chinese foreign firms, or they've seen bad behavior on that specific type of shrimp. For some reason, there's just suspicion there. So they're just going to say, we're going to detain this, and we're going to look to you, the importer, to prove that the shipment is good and should be released. So it's safe to say that the FDA is not as well funded as I'm sure they would like to be, and they're also short staffed. So actually, they don't test nearly as much product as they detain. Most things, I would say 90% of the imports that are detained are not tested by the FDA. They actually end up being tested by a firm like ours to get it cleared and released into commerce.
Okay, another question we have, this is one regarding the notice of action, which we've heard a lot. So the NOAs do not tend to arrive, or you don't have access to them. It can be several days until you get them. You've already got product at your warehouse ready to go, sitting there, waiting for the notice of action. So one option we have for you there, typically you'll know what your product will be detained for, or by searching that Import Alert website, we can figure out most likely what FDA will detain your product for. If this is the case, we can go ahead and sample your product based on the assumption that, let's say, for example, it's rice detained for carbendazim, for a pesticide. We can go ahead and collect samples, assuming that that is in fact what your product will be detained for, and begin the testing. The only hesitation we ever have on that is that the FDA really can do whatever they want, so there's always the slight risk that they decide to detain your product for something completely different, which usually will require a different set of subsamples that have to weigh a different amount, in which case we would have to go back out, resample your product, and begin a new analysis. So it is a slight risk if we are to go ahead and jump on the sampling and the testing without a notice of action, just in the event you are detained for something different. It is rare that that happens, but we can certainly expedite your testing and get moving with you if you don't have a notice of action yet. You just have to understand there is that risk of the additional cost of resampling and retesting. Okay, so another one is asking about respond by dates. So if you have a respond by date, for example, of November 15th, what does that mean? So what that means is that is the date that you have to file your petition, which in this case would be the form of the results in the packet that we would submit on your behalf to the FDA. You do have the ability to file and request extensions from your compliance officer. So if you have a deadline of November 15th and the particular testing we're doing for you will take a few more days than that, because there are instrumentation timelines for microbiology, there are certain incubation periods. We cannot push those any faster than what they're capable of doing. You do have the option to request an extension from your compliance officer. They're usually very accommodating with that. Sometimes they may want an email from us explaining that we've received the samples on a certain date, and it will take X more days to have your analysis completed, and you usually can get about a 2-week extension. There are cases where we've had clients who filed a third extension request and they've gotten it. So it is meant to be a hard deadline, but there are exceptions, and your compliance officer, as long as you communicate with them, generally will give you an extension request.
Yeah, and to Annie's point, with that question and answer, I think it's really important when you're dealing with FDA detentions and you're dealing with choosing a third-party lab to work with to solve these problems, that the third-party lab you choose should be well-versed in analysis of all different types of products, and should also be well-versed in speaking to the FDA compliance officers. And that means at the beginning of your detention, it means at the middle, and it definitely means at the end. So it could be, we interface with compliance officers routinely when it comes to sampling plans. If you're talking about wanting to do your own sampling, so doing self-sampling, that's another issue that we interface with the FDA on a regular basis. I believe that we speak FDAese pretty well here at ABC, and we have a good record with FDA and the compliance officers, and really being able to explain our clients' needs and having them respond in a very practical way.
Another question we have is, what is the time frame of results, which sort of ties into your respond by date? That is going to be very dependent on the actual analysis that's required from your notice of action. Microbiology have very specific incubation periods, so it is what it is. It can be anywhere from 2 days up to 9 days if confirmations are required. Again, we do communicate that with you as your samples are here at the lab. If you have pesticides or antibiotics, those take a few more days. The best way to answer that really is more of a case-by-case basis. As you send us notice of actions or what your product's detained for, when we send you quotes, we let you know the turnaround time so you know up front. Some analyses we are able to offer rush turnarounds, so we can speed that up for you. And again, we're happy to go through that with you individually or just based on your detentions. Another question, how do you transport the frozen samples? Those, what we do, our samplers will go ahead and package them in insulated coolers. If it's appropriate, they'll use dry ice or they will use frozen ice packs depending on your product and the analyses, and they are shipped via FedEx overnight delivery. So we do receive them the next morning. Usually our trucks are here about 10 o'clock in the morning. We do not have problems with product thawing as our samplers do package them properly.
Somebody raised a concern specifically about their location. We actually have samplers that are all over the U.S., and that means they can sample in maritime ports, airports, wherever your product is coming in, any cold storage facility that is the final destination for your products. So as far as the integrity of the products and making sure that frozen product stays frozen, refrigerated product stays refrigerated, that is not an issue. That's the business we're in. All right, so next question. So you're saying that we should do our own test while FDA is doing theirs. If you have been told that FDA has pulled a sample and is testing your shipment for a specific pathogen or analyte, you do have the option to ask FDA or inform them that you would like to go in and sample and have a third-party lab look at it at the same time. That is your right. A lot of the times, well, actually, I'd say 99% of the time, our results will be a lot faster than the FDA results. If I was a compliance officer and somebody offered me, results from a third-party lab to review while I'm sitting waiting on my own lab to finish what they were doing, compliance officers have a lot of power. So, they can always go ahead and take the product off detention, even without their own lab results in there. So they really do have a lot of power in their own hands to make decisions. I would advise to go ahead and sample. If you know that the FDA is taking a sample, go ahead, have somebody like ABC look at the product and give you back some results a lot faster than you'll hear from the FDA. Okay, next question. Would you share with the client if you get a subpoena? Yes, we would. The few times that we have been subpoenaed, the client's the first one to know, because usually there is some legal action or somebody from a regulatory body asking us for the information, and we politely say, we're a confidential lab, we cannot disclose client data. So sorry, we can't help you there. Usually we go back and we tell the client at that point, the FDA, let's say, has solicited your data from us. Obviously, we told them no. But yes, we definitely do give the client a heads up. Because our client, that's who we serve. We may test things and submit results to the FDA, but we don't submit to the FDA on anything else. Okay, another question. This one looks interesting. We have a product that is imported to the U.S. and is being exported to Canada. FDA detained it. Can we tell FDA that it is leaving the U.S. and ask for it to be released? If the U.S. is a transient port I suggest directly contacting the compliance officer and explaining that very situation. I'm not going to say you're always going to get the same answer from the compliance officer, but depending on where it comes in, you know, you may be able to pass it along. I'm not quite sure. I honestly believe that that's probably up to the compliance officer in that point. So, but let's do a couple more questions. Do you use sampling services, or is sampling always done by full-time ABC employees? Do we employ all your own?
So what we have is we do have a network of samplers that we use. Some of them are ABC employees. We do have a partner sampling company that we do use. They're fantastic. We do make sure everybody fulfills the requirements by FDA. So there are very specific collection reports and photo reports that have to accompany the samples. So everybody is trained to a certain level, and the FDA has become very stringent with the sampling that's taking place. We actually just spoke with someone in the Southwest District who was letting us know that they are implementing new sampling guidelines that all samplers will have to follow, and it's going to be much more stringent photo reports that are going to accompany all sampling. So we're always on top of exactly what FDA is going to request of us. We have one last one. Does ABC Labs submit the results to FDA electronically? We are doing that now. It's something new that FDA has asked of us. It's through their ITAC system. So all results are now being submitted electronically through ITAC.
All right, so I think that's it for today.
Yeah, thank you so much for attending. I hope we answered your questions. Like Gil said, if you have any others, feel free to email us directly. I'm Annie H at abcr.com, and Gillian is Gillian, Gillian, at abcr.com. We're both here to help you. Again, that will be emailed out to each of you as well. So you'll have our email addresses as well as that Import Alert website address and this whole presentation.
All right, thanks so much, guys, and you'll be getting a clear, concise, and full of all the slides presentation afterwards. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.